There's this strange belief in modern relationships that silence is somehow noble, that if you just keep the peace, bite your tongue, and endure quietly, things will fix themselves. Goal, but that's a dangerous lie. Let me tell you something that's as old as time. When the masculine voice retreats, the feminine soul begins to fracture. Not because she's weak, no, goal, but because she needs the frame, she needs the dialogue, she needs the confrontation that keeps chaos at bay. Without it, her foundation begins to crack slowly, quietly, and by the time you notice that the collapse is well underway, silence isn't peace, it's cowardice wearing the mask of patience. And when a man refuses to speak, when he hides from responsibility, from truth, goal, from the discomfort of confrontation, he abdicates his role in the structure of being. You see, relationship is not some fantasy where love floats freely without form. It's a constant negotiation of boundaries, of needs, of pain, of dreams. And every time you hold your tongue out of fear or laziness, you're contributing to the erosion of that structure. Because love without truth is manipulation. So when you feel something's wrong, speak. When you see her drifting, act. Don't let comfort take precedence over responsibility. Goal. She's not looking for your silence. She's craving your presence, your clarity, your backbone. You think avoiding the storm will keep the boat afloat. Goal. But what if she's drowning silently because you refuse to take the wheel? What if your passivity is the very weight pulling her under? You must become a man who speaks not just when it's easy, goal, but especially when it's hard, because that's when it counts. That's when your voice builds the walls that hold chaos at bay. That's when she begins to trust you, not because you're agreeable, goal, but because you're anchored. The longer you stay silent, the more she starts to crumble. And when she finally breaks, don't you dare act surprised. In a relationship, silence is often mistaken for wisdom. People say, don't rock the boat or pick your battles. But when silence becomes your default response, when you retreat from every moment that demands truth, goal, you are not choosing peace, you are choosing decay. Silence in the face of conflict, discomfort, or emotional tension is not virtuous. It is avoidance dressed up as maturity. And avoidance, by its very nature, goal, corrodes the foundation of any meaningful connection. When you fail to speak, especially when something needs to be said, you are not avoiding conflict. You're postponing it, and you're allowing it to grow in the shadows. And what festers in the dark grows teeth. You might tell yourself, it's better not to say anything. It'll pass. But things don't just pass. People don't just forget. What actually happens is that your partner, often without even realizing it, begins to carry the emotional burden you refuse to name. She starts internalizing your silence. Goal, she starts questioning what's wrong, not because she's overly sensitive, but because she can feel what you refuse to say. Humans are emotional creatures, highly attuned to tension. And when one partner disengages, it doesn't create peace. It creates confusion, insecurity, and eventually resentment. Goal, there's this illusion that staying silent is the higher road, that if you just let things go, you'll be seen as patient or kind. But more often than not, silence is a shield for fear. Fear of confrontation, goal, fear of vulnerability, fear of being misunderstood. And here's the tragedy. That fear, if left unchecked, becomes your compass. It decides when you speak and when you don't. Goal, it decides when to step forward or back. And slowly you become someone who's no longer a participant in the relationship. You're just a passive presence. You're physically there, but emotionally absent. Goal, and that absence begins to echo in the space between you. Think about the small moments when she shares something that bothers her and you nod, say, okay, but don't follow up. Gore, when she looks withdrawn and you notice it, but you say nothing because you're tired or unsure, or when something about the dynamic bothers you, goal, but you swallow it because you don't want to seem weak or demanding. Every one of those moments is a choice, and each time you choose silence, you're letting something vital slip through your fingers. Communication is the lifeblood of a relationship. It's not optional, it's not a bonus, it's essential, and when it stops, connection dies, not all at once, but bit by bit, quietly and invisibly. Now, well, this doesn't mean you need to be loud or aggressive. That's not the antidote to silence. What's required is honesty, grounded, courageous honesty. Speaking not to win, but to understand. Speaking not to blame, goal, but to bring clarity. You don't have to have the perfect words. In fact, you won't. But the act of speaking itself, of trying to bridge the distance with truth, that's what sustains a relationship. Goal, that's what creates intimacy. So when you feel tension, don't pretend it's not there. When you sense distance, don't chalk it up to a bad day and move on. When something inside you says, goal, listen, and then speak, even if your voice shakes, even if it's messy, even if it leads to discomfort. Because the discomfort of truth is far easier to bear than the long-term consequence of silence. And let's be clear, silence isn't just something you do to her. It's something you do to yourself. Every time you hold back, you weaken your own sense of integrity. You become less honest, not just with her, but with yourself. And when that becomes a pattern, you lose track of your inner compass. Goal, you become resentful, bitter, and emotionally exhausted, not because of what she did, but because of what you refuse to confront. Real peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the presence of understanding. Goal, and understanding requires words. It requires vulnerability. It requires showing up with your full self, not just when it's convenient, but especially when it's hard. Because in those hard moments, goal, when you risk the comfort of silence to protect the health of the relationship, that's when growth happens. That's when trust deepens. That's when love becomes resilient. So no, silence is not a virtue. Goal, not when it's used to avoid truth, not when it hides fear, not when it leaves the people we care about in the dark. Speak not perfectly, not always with eloquence, but with courage. Because your voice is not just for you, it's the foundation she stands on. And when you go quiet, the ground beneath her begins to crack. There's a deep psychological truth that modern culture often forgets. The masculine and feminine are not just social roles or stereotypes. They are archetypal forces present in every human relationship. Goal, playing a crucial role in how we relate, connect, and build meaning. When we say that the feminine requires a masculine frame, we're not speaking about dominance or control. We're talking about structure, about grounding, about a stabilizing presence that allows emotional expression to flow without overwhelming the system. Because without that grounding, the feminine begins to spin emotionally, psychologically, even spiritually. Feminine energy is deeply intuitive, emotional, and fluid. It thrives on connection, empathy, and depth. But it also tends toward chaos when uncontained, not in a negative sense, but in a raw, undirected sense. It seeks to be seen, to be held, to be responded to. And that's where the masculine comes in as the steady hand, the calm voice. Goal, the presence that does not flinch when the emotional waves rise. It's not about fixing her emotions. It's about being solid enough to hold space for them. But when that masculine presence withdraws, when the man goes silent, avoids, or abdicates his role, the feminine begins to feel unprotected. Not just physically, but emotionally. She feels unanchored. Goal. The flow turns into a flood. Her vulnerability, once a source of connection, becomes a source of anxiety. She begins to question her own stability, not because she lacks strength, but because she's missing the reflection that your steady presence provides. Now, that frame doesn't mean domination. It doesn't mean controlling her thoughts or decisions. Goal. It means creating an emotional container strong enough to handle the truth, both yours and hers. It means showing up with clarity, not disappearing into silence when things get difficult. Goal. It means being able to listen without collapsing, to respond without blaming, and to speak without attacking. The masculine frame provides direction, not dictatorship. It offers a vision. It says, goal, here's where I stand. Here's what I believe. Here's what I'm willing to fight for. And that clarity is something the feminine energy deeply respects, not because she wants to be ruled. Goal, but because she wants to be met, to be seen, to be understood. She wants to know that there is someone strong enough to weather her storms without running away. Goal, someone who doesn't just love her when she's smiling, but also when she's struggling. Someone who doesn't disappear into withdrawal the moment intensity rises. Without that frame, she starts to test. Not because she wants to destroy the relationship, but because she wants to find the edges. She needs to know, can you hold this? Can you stay with her in the fire? Will you still see her when she's overwhelmed? And if you can't, if your silence becomes your answer, she begins to crumble, slowly, quietly, and often invisibly. Goal, because no woman wants to carry the burden of emotional leadership alone. She'll do it if she has to, but it will cost her. It will harden her, exhaust her. She may become more controlling, more anxious. Goal, more reactive, not because she's inherently those things, but because she's been forced to fill a role that isn't hers to fill. You see, a strong masculine presence doesn't suppress emotion. It regulates it. It creates a rhythm, a balance. It turns wild chaos into beautiful flow. Goal, but that can only happen when the man is grounded in something deeper than his own comfort. He must be anchored in truth, in principle, in purpose. Because without those anchors, goal, he becomes just as lost, and then both partners drift in uncertainty, grasping for meaning in silence. So when you step into that frame, when you choose to be present, honest, and unshaken by emotional turbulence, you're not just being a better man, you're becoming a container for safety, for growth, for vulnerability. Goal, you're giving her the gift of freedom, not by controlling her, but by giving her something she can trust, something unspoken that says, you can be fully yourself, go and I will not collapse. This isn't about playing a role. It's about living out the architecture of responsibility. She needs your presence. She needs your steadiness, not just when things are calm, goal, but especially when they're not. Because it's in those moments when her world is spinning, when she's unsure, when her emotions rise, that your frame becomes the difference between her chaos being destructive or creative. And if you disappear, if you go quiet, goal, if you refuse to be that structure, then don't be surprised when she begins to crumble, because she wasn't looking for a perfect man. She was looking for a grounded one. Goal, love without truth is a dangerous illusion. It's a hollow promise that can't hold the weight of real human experience. When people say, I love you, but withhold the truth, whether because it's uncomfortable, inconvenient, or frightening, they are not building intimacy. They are building walls of deception. And those walls don't protect. They isolate. Truth is the bedrock of any meaningful relationship. It is the framework upon which trust is built, and without trust, love falters. Goal, you cannot separate love from truth, because love is not simply an emotion. It is a practice of honesty and vulnerability. Goal, to truly love someone means to be willing to stand in the light of reality with them, not to hide behind comforting lies or convenient silences. When you avoid truth, goal, when you silence your voice to keep the peace or to avoid confrontation, you are engaging in a subtle form of manipulation. It might not look like deception in the traditional sense, Goal, but it is nonetheless deceptive because it denies your partner the full reality of who you are and what you feel. It denies her the chance to respond authentically, to engage with you honestly, goal, and to grow alongside you. This is why silence in this context is not peace, it's control. It controls the narrative by withholding the facts. It controls the relationship by avoiding accountability. Goal controls the emotional space by denying the existence of conflict. But conflict is not the enemy of love. It's a natural and necessary part of it. Conflict, when met with truth and respect, is the fire that forges deeper connection. It reveals differences, clarifies boundaries, and invites growth. You might fear that telling the truth will hurt her or cause distance. But what you fear is often less damaging than the slow erosion caused by silence. A relationship sustained by lies or omissions eventually collapses under the weight of unspoken resentment, misunderstanding, and mistrust. The cracks may be invisible at first, but they grow deeper with every unspoken word. Furthermore, truth is not a blunt weapon to wound or dominate. It is a careful, courageous offering. Goal. Speaking truth requires tact, empathy, and timing. It requires the ability to listen as well as to speak. But these qualities do not dilute the necessity of truth. They refine it. Goal. Being honest doesn't mean being cruel. It means being clear, being real. When you commit to truth, you are committing to a relationship that can weather storms. Goal, because truth shines a light on problems before they fester. It invites solutions instead of blame. It encourages both partners to meet each other with openness instead of suspicion. In this way, or goal, truth is an act of love, a profound expression of respect for the other person's autonomy and humanity. On the other hand, when truth is absent, love becomes a fragile facade. It's a performance maintained for appearances. It's love based on illusion rather than reality. And illusions do not endure, they shatter. The longer the silence, the more brittle the bond. Imagine a house built on sand. Every lie, every omission is another grain of sand shifted beneath the foundation. At first, the structure seems stable. But over time, gold, the shifting ground weakens it until the house crumbles. That is what happens when truth is replaced by silence in a relationship. You might think you are protecting her by not speaking your truth. But in reality, you are protecting yourself, your comfort, your ego, your fear of confrontation. And this self-protection comes at a cost because the other person, the one you claim to love, is left in the dark, trying to piece together fragments of reality that don't add up. Love thrives on authenticity. It requires the courage to be seen fully, flaws and all. It requires the willingness to engage with difficult emotions, uncomfortable realities, and uncertain outcomes. This is why truth is not just a moral ideal, but a practical necessity. Without it, love becomes fragile, dependent on illusions, and vulnerable to collapse. So, goal, when you feel the urge to stay silent, when the temptation to withhold truth for the sake of peace arises, remember that true peace is born from truth, not silence. Goal, remember that your silence is not protecting her, it's betraying her. And remember that the greatest act of love you can offer is the courage to be honest, no matter how difficult it may seem. Goal, because love without truth is not love at all. It is a mask worn until it falls off. And when it does, what remains is the rubble of what could have been if only you had dared to speak. Avoidance is often mistaken for peace. People believe that by sidestepping difficult conversations, by retreating into silence when emotions run high, they are preserving harmony. But in truth, avoidance is a slow poison. It allows problems to grow unchecked, festering beneath the surface until they erupt in ways that are far more destructive than the original issue ever was. When you avoid addressing conflict or discomfort in a relationship, you're not protecting it, you're allowing chaos to take root and multiply. Every relationship contains tension. Every connection experiences conflict. This is inevitable because two imperfect people are trying to build something meaningful together. Goal. The difference between a healthy relationship and a failing one isn't the presence or absence of conflict, it's how conflict is handled. Avoidance simply delays the necessary engagement with those conflicts. Goal. It creates a vacuum where uncertainty thrives, and uncertainty is fertile ground for fear, suspicion, and misunderstanding. When you choose silence or withdrawal instead of confrontation, goal, you are sending a message, intentional or not, that the issue is too difficult, too risky, or too unimportant to face. This message is devastating because it tells your partner that their concerns, feelings, or needs are not worthy of attention. Over time, this breeds resentment. Resentment, once lodged in the heart, distorts perception and hardens emotions. What could have been a simple conversation becomes a wall of bitterness and distance. Avoidance also robs you of agency. It puts you in the position of passive observer in your own life. Go watching as problems grow while doing nothing to stop them. This passivity weakens your sense of self and your sense of responsibility. It makes you a bystander in a relationship that requires active participation. Goal. And when both partners avoid difficult issues, the relationship begins to decay from within. Furthermore, avoidance doesn't just affect the relationship, it affects the individual. Emotional issues left unresolved can manifest as anxiety, depression, or physical symptoms. The mind and body carry the weight of unspoken tensions. You may think you are protecting yourself by staying silent, but in reality, you are accumulating stress that will eventually demand release, often in unhealthy ways. It's important to recognize that confrontation does not mean conflict must escalate into argument or fight. Proper confrontation is about addressing issues with honesty and respect. Goal. It's about saying what needs to be said and listening with an open heart. It requires courage, yes, but it also requires care. Confrontation is not the enemy of love. It is a tool for its preservation. Avoiding confrontation is often rooted in fear of rejection, fear of hurting the other person, fear of being misunderstood, or fear of the discomfort itself. But fear, if left unchecked, goal, dictates your behavior in ways that undermine the very things you want to protect. Courage doesn't mean absence of fear. It means acting despite it. When you face issues directly, goal, you create space for resolution and growth. You dismantle misunderstandings before they calcify into grudges. You clarify expectations before they become disappointments. Goal, you invite intimacy by showing vulnerability and openness. This is the soil in which trust and love flourish. On the other hand, avoidance lets problems compound silently. Small cracks widen unnoticed. Emotional distance grows invisible but palpable. One day, the structure can no longer bear the weight of neglect and it collapses. Goal. The tragedy is that the collapse could have been prevented by honest conversation and mutual effort. Remember, relationships are living systems that require attention and maintenance. Avoidance is neglect. Goal. And neglect breeds decay. To protect what you value, you must confront what threatens it. You must speak when it is hard. You must listen when it is uncomfortable. You must act when inertia tempts you to do nothing. In the end, avoidance is not a strategy for peace. It is an invitation to chaos. The choice is yours to face the difficult truths and build resilience, or to hide and watch the foundation crumble beneath you. Goal. The longer you avoid, the more you surrender control, until one day there's nothing left to save. There is an invisible but undeniable cost to silence, a cost that accumulates over time and chips away at the very fabric of a relationship. It is not just the absence of words. Goal. It is the erosion of emotional presence, the gradual loss of connection, and the quiet death of mutual understanding. When you remain silent in moments that demand engagement, you are withdrawing your energy, your attention, and your care, and that withdrawal is felt deeply, often before words are even spoken. Every person has a profound need to feel seen, heard, and valued. This need is not trivial. It is foundational to human well-being. When your partner speaks, even about difficult topics, she is reaching out, offering a piece of herself in the hope of being understood. Goal. When you choose silence instead of response, you are essentially turning away. This turning away is a form of rejection. It tells her that what she has to say does not matter. Goal. That her feelings do not deserve your time, that the emotional bridge she is trying to build is not worth crossing. The cumulative effect of these moments of rejection is devastating. Goal. They create emotional wounds that may not be visible but are deeply felt. They foster loneliness within the relationship, a loneliness far more painful than physical isolation. Goal. She begins to feel invisible in the very space where she should feel most alive and supported. Moreover, silence undermines trust. Trust is not just about faithfulness or reliability. Goal. It is about believing that the other person will be there for you in your moments of vulnerability. When you go silent, you break that belief. You create doubt. You sow seeds of insecurity. Over time, goal. This doubt grows into fear. Fear that she cannot rely on you, that you will disappear when she needs you most, that the emotional safety she craves is an illusion. Goal. This is why silence is so dang close relationships. It creates a paradox where physical proximity exists, but emotional distance grows. The two people share the same space, but live in separate worlds. They may even speak to each other, but the real communication has ceased. This emotional disconnection breeds frustration, resentment, and despair. Goal. It is also important to recognize that silence communicates something. It is not neutral. Often, silence says, I don't want to deal with this, or this is too much for me, or worse, goal, I don't care enough to try. None of these messages nurture love or connection. They instead cultivate feelings of abandonment and rejection. Sometimes silence is a defense mechanism. People retreat into silence to protect themselves from pain or conflict. But while it may shield in the short term, it damages in the long term. Emotional avoidance builds walls, and walls isolate. The more you build these walls, the harder it becomes to break through them later. To prevent this slow unraveling, engagement is essential. Engagement means more than just speaking words. Goal. It means showing up fully with your attention, your empathy, and your willingness to participate in the emotional life of the relationship. It means listening actively, responding thoughtfully. Goal. And sharing your own truth with courage. Even when you don't have perfect answers, even when you're unsure or afraid, choosing to engage is a statement of commitment. It says, you matter to me. Our relationship matters. I am here even in difficult. That presence is a powerful balm to the wounds that silence inflicts. It's also worth noting that engagement does not guarantee immediate resolution. Sometimes conversations are messy, emotional, or unresolved for a time, but the act of engaging itself builds resilience. It creates a rhythm of connection that can sustain the relationship through ups and downs. Goal. Contrast, silence interrupts that rhythm. It creates a pause that stretches into a gap, and that gap can become a chasm. Repairing a chasm is far more difficult than navigating a temporary pause. Goal. That is why the longer you stay silent, the more the relationship begins to crumble. Ultimately, relationships thrive on connection, and connection thrives on engagement. To stay silent is to withdraw from connection. To engage, even imperfectly, is to invest in the relationship's survival and growth. If you want your relationship to endure, Goal, if you want it to deepen and flourish, then you must resist the temptation of silence. You must choose presence over avoidance, courage over fear, engagement over withdrawal. Goal, because the cost of silence is too high. It is the slow unraveling of what could have been the strongest bond you have ever known. In every relationship, there exists a delicate balance between presence and absence, between connection and withdrawal. Goal, one of the most destructive forces that can quietly erode the balance is silence. Not the peaceful kind that brings rest, but the heavy charged silence that follows withdrawal and avoidance. Goal, when silence becomes the default response to conflict, to pain, or to emotional expression, it does far more than leave words unspoken. It creates a vacuum. And in that vacuum, uncertainty, fear, goal, and disintegration quietly thrive. Silence in relationships often starts as a defense mechanism. It might begin with good intentions, avoiding hurt, preventing escalation, or giving space to cool down. But when that silence lingers too long, it becomes a wall separating two people who once sought to be close. The longer you stay silent, the more that wall solidifies, goal, until it becomes a barrier so thick that it's nearly impossible to see or hear each other through it. This kind of silence is a form of absence, an absence of communication, yes, but more profoundly, goal, an absence of presence. Presence is more than just physical proximity. It's emotional availability, attentiveness, and willingness to engage even when it's hard. When one partner retreats into silence, they are effectively withdrawing that presence. The other partner, left in the echoing emptiness, begins to feel abandoned. This feeling of abandonment is not just painful, it shakes the foundation of trust and safety that relationships require. The psychological impact of this withdrawal can be devastating. Humans are wired for connection. Brains are designed to respond to social cues, to empathy, and to emotional resonance. When those keys disappear, when the feedback loop of interaction breaks down, the mind begins to fill the void with anxiety, doubt, and confusion. Questions arise. Why is he or she not responding? Have I done something wrong? Is this the end? Without answers, those questions multiply, spinning into a whirlwind of fear. Over time, goal, that fear morphs into a deep-seated insecurity. The partner left waiting in silence starts to second-guess their worth and the viability of the relationship itself. This insecurity can manifest as clinginess, resentment, withdrawal, or emotional shutdown, each a different attempt to cope with the pain of absence. But none of these responses restore connection. Instead, they often deepen the divide. Moreover, silence breeds assumptions. Without open communication, people fill in the blanks with their own interpretations, which are often skewed by fear or past experiences. Goal. This can lead to misunderstandings that escalate tension rather than resolve it. Instead of clarifying reality, silence obscures it, creating a landscape where mistrust grows wild. The longer silence persists, goal, the more it chips away at the shared reality that relationships depend on. Shared reality is the common ground of understanding, of knowing each other's thoughts, feelings, and intentions. It is what binds two people together in a coherent narrative us. When silence dominates, that narrative fractures. Each person starts living in a separate story, no longer synchronized, no longer connected. In practical terms, the consequences of prolonged silence are visible in emotional distance, decreased intimacy, and increased conflict. Goal, the initial intent of silence, to avoid hurt or conflict, backfires spectacularly. Instead of peace, it brings tension. Instead of safety, it creates vulnerability through abandonment. Goal, but the damage by silence is not inevitable. It can be repaired, though the work requires courage and commitment. The first step is awareness step. Goal, recognizing when silence is no longer serving the relationship and is instead corroding it. This requires self-reflection and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths about one's own behavior. Next comes the willingness to break the silence. This can be terrifying, opening the door to confrontation, vulnerability, and uncertainty. But it is necessary. Communication, even imperfect communication, is the lifeline that reconnects separated hearts. It rebuilds trust by demonstrating presence and care. It dispels assumptions by inviting clarity. Importantly, breaking silence doesn't mean having all the answers or resolving every issue immediately. It means initiating dialogue, expressing willingness to engage, and showing openness to listen. Goal. It means prioritizing the relationship's health over individual discomfort. This is the essence of responsibility in relationships, stepping up, speaking out, and staying present even when it is hard. When silence is replaced by honest communication, something profound happens. The emotional walls begin to crumble. The vacuum fills with shared understanding and empathy. The narrative os is restored. Goal. The relationship moves from a fragile, uncertain state into one of resilience and depth. At the end, the longer you stay silent, the more she starts to crumble. Not just emotionally, but in her sense of safety, goal, trust, and connection. But the reverse is also true. The more you choose to speak, to engage, and to be present, the more you build a foundation that can withstand storms. Goal. You create a space where love is not just a feeling, but a living practice of courage and presence. The choice is yours, to retreat into silence and watch the slow collapse, or to break it and build something stronger.